What's good, everybody? Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, my company, the J. David Group, is sponsoring this podcast. We help founders and CEOs turn their startups into unicorns by introducing them to CROs and VPs of sales with track records of generating revenue, building teams, and scaling growth. This podcast is also being sponsored by Allego. For all you sales leaders out here, have you ever absolutely nailed sales training or had a rep who killed a presentation that you just wished you could you recorded to be seen later by new hires or other members of the team? Well, that's just one of the things that Allego can do. Not only does it allow you to record your best content for practice, collaboration, and feedback, but it gives you a way to organize all of your best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help improve sales performance for everyone, which to me, I think is a key differentiator. Email me, web with 2 B's at thejdavidgroup.com so I can personally introduce you to someone who will take great care of you. Now, my guest today is Brent Keltner, founder and president of Winalytics, which uses a unique software-enabled services model to help clients achieve top potential growth by consistently positioning and qualifying buyers at each phase of their journey. Prior to Winalytics, he spent 10 years as a revenue leader in early stage and enterprise companies and 10 years as a Ph.D. social scientist at Stanford and the Rand Corporation. Brent, welcome to Over Quota.
Hey, Jay. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. So let's just start with what I just ended with, which is tell us a little bit more about Winalytics and what compelled you to start it after having your prior career.
Yeah. So you kind of covered the highlights of my background. We are a go-to-market and revenue acceleration consultancy. And we think of our secret sauce as really helping companies move from a more product-driven selling approach to what we call an authentic buyer journey, authentic buyer and customer journey, which anchors every single buyer or customer interaction on what your buyers care about the most. What's in it for them? What is the win? What's the payoff to working with your company? Sort of identifying that both to accelerate the land motion, but also to set up your account expansion motion. So that's the work that we do. And I got here kind of a circuitous route, which is I started out life, as you said, as a Ph.D. social scientist. And was, working at the Rand Corporation, had been at Stanford, doing qualitative research interviews, which it turns out are a lot like a sales call if you structure them well. And I was a good researcher. I was really good at bringing dollars in the door. 1 year at Rand was PI or co-PI and like $3.5 million in grants. And they sat me down and said, right, Brent, great year. Rather than a 3.5% pay raise, you get a 5.5% pay raise. And I was like, I got to find a different venue for this skill set. And I did what academics call going to the dark side. And I went and worked at Kaplan in their higher education group, leveraging the PhD, but now, selling from a company, selling into higher ed or corporate learning. And I then, went from there to EduVentures, Collegiate Link, and then on to Plus Delta Partners, and had 3 or 4 really quick successes, kind of growth successes in terms of putting together teams, shifting a growth trajectory, particularly at EduVentures, which was my first true revenue leadership role. And as I got to the end of that run, I was like, hey, there's a method to this madness. And it really went back to the way I had run qualitative research reviews at Rand, where I thought, I got to do this in a commercial way. Otherwise, business executives aren't going to want to engage with me if I'm just this kind of theoretical academic. So I would always just start with what's in it for them. Why should they show up for the call, right? What are they going to get out of it in the call? Very clear to recap what I heard on what they were working on, what they wanted to do next. Always clear on, okay, what's my next step with your team out of this? Always very quick to kind of socialize. Hey, here are the other banks or insurance companies did a lot of work in the service sector that we're working with. Just like, what's in it for you that can build momentum? When I got to EduVentures, asked a bunch of my business friends to send me resources on go-to-market strategy, sales positioning strategy. And I got these resources and they all said, buyer customer, and then they're about the product.
Right.
Positioning the product, battle cards, pricing your products. Like, where's the customer? Where's the buyer? So I took everything I'd learned and I built what we now call the authentic buyer journey. And I did that just like I would teach people, always start with what they care about, map back to what they care about, your product, only talk about your product and company, what they care about, and then close on what actions are they willing to take to secure that value. And so then I just turned it into a methodology, started Winalytics, and started doing consulting.
That's amazing. I have so many follow-up questions there. But when you talk about the buyer journey, what steps are along the journey? Walk that. Give us the highlights of what that journey looks like.
Yeah, I think something we may talk about here is just kind of playbooks and playbook concepts. But if you think about what's the first step in the journey is from a buyer's point of view, that's just becoming aware of you and your service or your product and what problem might it help them with. That's prospecting, right? That's your marketing content, your website, your prospecting motion. And what a lot of companies, if they start to look at it, we'll talk about how great our product is. We'll talk about all our product awards, right? We'll talk about, and so the first is just awareness of what problem can you solve for them and inviting them to a value-added conversation about that. So first phase is just kind of awareness. Now they've committed to a call, and then it's like beginning to educate them on starting with what our problems are they working on, and educating on how your solution might be able to solve for that. And the more we can talk only about our product that aligns to their goal, and we can share success stories with peers, companies they recognize and they care about, now we're engaging them, right? And kind of educating them on how we can, how we might help them solve the problem. And then so that's sales and deal velocity. You're kind of getting the right people involved. And then we think about it's about closing and expansion. And we put those together because in good selling, you're not closing on one goal. You might be closing on multiple goals. And I think we have a shared colleague, Mark Roberge at HubSpot, who is our CRO from 0 to 100 million. We interviewed him for our book that's coming up. And he actually changed the incentive comp system for his sales team to say, I will give you 120% of revenue on everything that closes from the initial close through to 12 months. And they said, Mark, you're crazy. I'm going to identify 5 things we could close and only close 1. And he said, go for it. Right. So good discovery in sales is we figure out multiple problems we can solve, might land on 1 or 2, but then we've set up the whole expansion motion for the account management team, customer success team. So you got to get them interested in talking to you. There's a lot of people coming at them. What's the value add for them to come into the call? You got to get them excited about what's the impact. We talk about a buyer payoff statement that you get to early in discovery, and you get the team lined up on. So what's the payoff to them? And then you got to close on not just a single goal area, but prioritizing across a bunch of goal areas. And now you're managing the customer relationship around when do we come back to those other goal areas.
Is it safe to say awareness so step 1, awareness, step 2, education, step 3, closing and expansion, step 4, what you just mentioned, and now I lost it, that last part about
it's like the renewal and the customer success, right? Keeping them excited about what problems you're solving and upselling those. And absolutely, I mean, the middle part, people will talk about education, but we really talk about finding fit. Right? Is that good selling used to be at closing, right? You could sell ice to the Eskimo. On the current environment, the level of noise, the number of decision makers, they say 6 to 8. It doesn't matter if you're a great closer. What it matters is if you can find fit with a buyer and get them to tell you what success would be.
Yes.
So that buyer defined success statement. So that middle is really about configuration, tailoring, whatever you want to call it, kind of solution mapping, some people call it, but it's all about finding fit. They have a problem that you can help them solve.
Got it. And I got to come back to something you said earlier in your experience. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was EduVentures, but you mentioned PI. What was the PI? I was thinking,
Oh, principal investigator.
oh, principal and
Principal investigator. So when you write a proposal to like the Sloan Foundation or the Ford Foundation or a state government, the project leaders are called principal investigators.
oh,
So
okay.
if you're a principal investigator, it's your project. If you're a co-PI, you're kind of one of the co-leads.
Got it. Okay,
Sorry,
cool.
a
That was
little academic speak.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. I'd only heard PI as it pertained to a test, an assessment test, so to speak, that everybody knows in sales. But okay, cool. Got it. One other thing, I want to talk to you more about the journey, the stages of the journey and the playbook. But who's your ideal customer? Like, define that for me. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there are three segments we serve, and the ideal customer is probably in, call it the 1 to 2 million to 20 million space and 20 million in revenue. And there's two buckets there. We think of in that earlier kind of sub 5 million, often you have forming go-to-market teams. You're getting out of the everybody doing everything founder syndrome. You've got customers, you've got revenue, you've got product, and you've started to do marketing, sales, customer success. But it's often defining your playbooks for each of those. How do we go to market most effectively at each of those phases of the buying customer journey? And then how do we coordinate across? So it's just building your kind of an end-to-end go-to-market journey. And then as you get bigger, often now you have a marketing team, you have a prospecting team, a sales team, a customer success team, but you need to really, now as you build separate teams, you really need to connect buyer value across all of those. So those are kind of growth go-to-market teams. And often there's two things that happen is the buyer and customer journey gets disconnected. The way marketing is talking about the website and the sales language isn't necessarily the same, which creates friction for the buyers, right? You want to create a very integrated value story from every touch. And the second thing that happens is now as you get teams, 4 or 5, whatever in each area, you get top performers and you get kind of middle performers. And the better you are at writing down in playbooks what works for your top performers, the quicker you can accelerate team performance. You started with a Lego and this idea of practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the foundation of practice is a playbook.
Right.
And the easiest way to think about that is, sports teams have a playbook and they practice all the time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of go-to-market teams don't have a playbook that's written down. They don't practice. So they don't execute, right? They don't actually practice outside of calls in role plays or team learning sessions or recorded, videos that you can coach on.
Mm-hmm.
So the foundation as you get to that growth stage of really top performance is shared playbooks and then practicing those.
You mentioned something that's interesting to me. Why don't more people have playbooks, right? These are obviously smart people that are starting, great companies and have done well. You would think that they would know better, I guess. Why don't they have playbooks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most do have some version of playbooks, what they would think of as playbooks, and they have things that are written down. Often the disconnect is connecting your playbooks, right? So you'll have prospecting cadences, right, that marketing writes, and then you probably have a set of discovery questions that your sales team will have, and your sales team has a deck. But the idea of connecting those across buyer value and buyer value by persona, often people don't make that connection. And then once they write it down, so, a good sales deck, managing like we all know, a stakeholder call, a bunch of people on the other side is hard, right? You're managing all the other stakeholders, you're managing your internal constituencies, you're managing your technology. And so really just the practicing, how does that stakeholder call go? And how can I use a deck to run through it? So I always reset on what my buyer cares about. What have I heard to date? What is the discovery to date? Do the new players in the call agree with the priorities that came out of my first call? Would they reprioritize? Would they say things differently? Okay, then how do I message back or demo my software, some consistent talk tracks? And then how do I close the call? around, what's our plan forward, sometimes at a later stage of what's our mutual plan forward or mutual success plan. Am I going to build an ROI case? So just building a deck, then you need to actually practice it and beat it up, right? So people don't have connected playbooks, and they often don't do the ongoing practice that can really sharpen execution.
When you say buyer value, you're talking about what the buyer cares about most at that particular stage in the journey. Is that right?
That's right.
Good.
I mean, we talk about building value narratives or value playbooks. It's like, what are the stories you tell your buyers about how you can drive revenue for them or reduce their costs or build efficiency or change a key user experience? I'll give you a great example of one of the stories we start with in the book. Immersion, which was just named, it's an immersive virtual reality platform for soft skills training, things like leadership or customer service or diversity and inclusion, or there's one other bucket that I'm missing, but focuses on that. It is a blended AI and human experience, right? Which is new for virtual reality. So you really have to see it to understand it. What happened is they would demo this transformational technology, and then 4 demos later, they weren't sure if there was a buyer problem that they were solving because they were focused on their product. So we said, great. I mean, you do need to show them their product. They haven't experienced it. If you do discovery and then show them the product, you're going to have to do rediscovery. Give them a quick demo. And then the question is, what learning and development initiative would this help with? What would it help with most? Where are you struggling with leadership or diversity and inclusion that's on the CHRO's mind, right? So we start with our product, but very quickly, okay, what buyer goal does that help accomplish? Or another example is TrueFit, which has a retail personalization platform. So you can go, if a retailer like Macy's works with them, now it's on their website, somebody can go and put in all their kind of fashion parameters as well as information about their personal stature, and they can get recommendations on the right brands or the right size in a brand to fit. And they again were selling a transformational technology, but when we worked with the sales leadership and the marketing team, it's okay, what problems does that solve for buyers? Well, it comes down to, if you have that, you can capture more of your web traffic and get them to actually become customers, right? Place an order. You can reduce returns because people are now getting the right product the first time, substantially by 20%. You can increase customer lifetime value because now you much better at marketing, retargeting them, et cetera. And so now they change their both prospecting and discovery motion to lead with, are you working on one of these problems? More web traffic, capturing that web traffic, converting that web traffic, reducing returns. Okay, tell me more. What's working? What's not working? Why haven't you solved that problem? What have you tried? What hasn't worked? Now they're telling you exactly not just their goal, but their gap. All right, this is how TrueFit solves that problem. So now we're aligning to what they care about the most, something they can build a success statement around that we can help them solve.
What are the playbooks? Because obviously I know that there are multiple, and you touched upon it a little bit there. Spell it out for us. Like, what are the 5 key playbooks that teams should be running?
Yeah, we think of go-to-market teams should have 5. Value playbook, right? Which is just the stories we tell our buyers about value. How does that vary by segment and persona? I mean, we're in an environment where you really need to think about hyper-personalization, right? So if you're selling to Macy's, you need to think about be able to bring your most closest peers or clients, right? They don't necessarily want to hear about Oakley, right? Another retailer. So when you think about content, it's not just what problems am I solving, but what are my talk tracks back? And then what are my best client stories? Stories sell. So the better you can have stories that relate to your different personas and segments, the better. So the value playbook really anchors your content around what drives value for your customers by buyer persona and by segment. And then you take that into a prospecting playbook, which is how do you invite people into a high quality first call? It's an invitation to a value added call. It's not about coming to learn about our product. It's value added call. And then it's a sales and deal velocity playbook, which for us is all, we talk about running a 3-part meeting as the anchor of any, the foundation of a sales meeting. It starts with what they care about. We map to what they care about, and we close on what they're willing to do about it. So that, and then how do we anchor on the buyer success statement throughout the entire sales process? So sales and deal velocity, that's playbook number 3. It's the landing and the expansion, because it's really all around identifying multiple goal areas. How can we, what's the right order to service those? Can we bundle them to strategically think about strategic price discounts? And then the 5th playbook is renewal and customer success. So value playbook, prospecting playbook, sales and deal velocity, landing and expansion, renewal and customer success.
We drill down on a couple of those that I think are interesting and important. Deal velocity and expansion.
Yep.
Tell me, define deal velocity for me, first of all.
Yeah, so deal velocity is, I mean, there are 2 elements of that. It's, we think of the most important is the conversion. What is your conversion rate on a first discovery meeting? So if somebody's agreed to a call with me, what percentage of those first calls that are qualified do I get to a closed won deal? Is that 10%? Is that 14%? Is that 22%? Because that's probably your most important driver of pipeline productivity. And then the second is, how long does that take?
Got it. Okay.
And we focus on the first because our experience is there's a lot of skills and practices that can help with increasing your conversion rates. Mm-hmm. Often the length of the sales cycle is baked into more how many folks on their side have to get involved and the length of their legal process.
And just to be clear, the key metric there is qualified leads to close, essentially, or qualified meetings, I guess, to close. Is that?
I mean, most people would call it SQO, sales qualified opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's kind of your first folks that have committed to a discovery call. You've completed that. Mm-hmm. So let's say sales qualified opportunity to a close. Got it. That's the measure we're trying to most affect in the deal velocity playbook.
And within that playbook, how do you advise folks to improve that measure, right? To improve that ratio that you just alluded to? What are some of the plays, I guess, that you're running within that playbook that will help improve that ratio? Yeah.
So I'd say there's 2 things that we point to. One is we talk about running 3-part calls. Mm-hmm. And it sounds really simple. It's, we know sales is a little bit like verbal combat. So it's hard, right? We get on and we want to instantly get some momentum. But if you commit to running 3-part calls, which says at the beginning, I want to know something about what you care about the most and what's going to get you excited. So you commit to some, value discovery, we talk about it, which is what problems are you working on? What are your goals? What keeps you up at night? Ideally getting to, we think about getting beyond that first level of discovery to just, I'm working on this to, so in the TrueFit example, I'm working on returns. Okay, well, do you have a goal around returns? Does your boss have a goal around returns? Like, what would get you excited? What's your success statement around if we were to work together, to improve returns? How would you define success? So let's start on what they care about the most. The middle is let's talk about our products and our success stories and our company relative to what they care about the most. We call that value mapping. And then you got to commit, and this is something all the time, even senior sellers, you got to commit to, hey, we're coming to time. We got 10 minutes left. I want to make sure we have time to understand what you've heard today, what's most valuable to you, and what would we do about it next. So value confirmation, they have to tell us what they value most. And there is another story in our book from Roger Van Erkel from Research Solutions, and his team, says at the end of the call, they ask the buyer, should we continue? People are like, you're crazy. You're giving him an opportunity to say no. And he's like, exactly. I want to know if they see enough value to continue. And if the answer is yes, then it's why. Right. Okay, this is what I heard on why we should continue. What do you think? Should we continue? Should we focus on that? Who would you want to bring? So that value confirmation is intentionally stopping. Last 10 minutes of call. Where are you seeing fit, Jay? We just talked about your goals. We talked about our product. Where are you seeing the most fit? I have some ideas. This is what I heard. Does that align with what you think? What should we do about it next? What do you need to do next? What should I do next? So run 3-part meetings. That's number one. And number two is, you think about every buyer-facing asset. So we run calls, and then we send a follow-up email. And then we have a deck that we use for the next call. And then we send them the deck. And then we usually have a proposal. If you pay attention to this now, you work with sales teams, 80% of those things we send to buyers never recap what they said would be success to them. And they very infrequently recap the next committed actions. So yes, we start working with teams that say, why are you teaching us how to sell follow-up emails? We write follow-up emails, and we're like, yeah, 100%, you guys are senior, you know what you're doing. Let's just agree and let's peer coach each other. Did you get in that follow-up email to first 2 sentences, what did the buyer say would be successful before you talked about your product? And did you recap what their next committed actions are? So 3-part meeting, run a 3-part meeting, and then put it in every follow-up. Follow-up email, this is what you said you'd value. This is how we solve that problem. Here are the next actions we'd agreed to. Your deck should follow that 3-part structure as well.
Let me ask you this. What do you do when you get to value confirmation? So you talked about the beginning, which is talk about what they care about most, talk about value mapping, map to their values, and then value confirmation, which is confirming, what they care about and make sure that it's mapped to what your, what they want to solve, right? And hopefully you'll be able to help them solve that. Like there's an agreement there. But what if they say to that question, no? Like, which is perfectly fine to your point, but is there a playbook for that, I guess, or a play that you run to sort of go back to step 1 within that, or visit steps 1 and 2 before you get off? How should one handle that when they do get a no?
Yeah, I mean, I think a basic objection handling is clarification, right? Mm-hmm. Middle of the call, end of the call. I think what you want to do is then just ask them, so here's where I saw potential fit. Do you see it differently? Mm-hmm. Or why? I'm going to be just curious to learn more why you don't see a fit or how this doesn't align with your initiatives.
Got it. Yep.
And I'll give you a very specific example in one of our own sales processes where we were talking about the value of having these persona-based playbooks, right? That speak to value for every persona on the other side. And there's a, kind of a early stage prospect where we're just having a disconnect. And the disconnect was they were thinking about, well, we don't need persona-based playbooks in prospecting. We have all the leads we can handle. And so that's what I asked them, like, why they didn't see alignment. And that's what they said. And then I said, okay, and what about on the sales side? If now with a first meeting, your sales team could actually think of 4 or 5 potential users on the other side that might be interested in your platform, would that help them engage? And might it help you close it? And they're like, oh yeah. So this whole time we had been disconnecting, right? We were thinking about persona-based playbooks as part of the sales and deal velocity. Mm-hmm. They were thinking of prospecting. So I think getting them to clarify what they heard and why there wasn't a fit, and see if there's a restarting point. To your point, you're going back to fit. And sometimes you may not, as Roger's example, they may say, no, we shouldn't continue. And then it's okay, we shouldn't continue.
How does that affect the length of the sales process? Tell us a little bit more about that and some of the things that are happening during the sales cycle that can shorten the sales process.
Yeah, I mean, I think what our experience is really good qualification around starting with fit, as you said, and then it's the decision process. What it actually helps, the reason it shortens the sales process is it narrows the deals that you focus on to the high quality deals. And so often what you'll see is, sellers have, it's going to make it up, 50 deals they're working, and probably a good third of those are really in drift mode, right? Because they never actually got the buyer to tell them, whether they see a fit or not. So if you narrow your time to how do you advance the deals that you can close, what you end up doing is closing at a higher rate, and you close them faster because now you're kind of thinking about the deals you can close. What's the right next step?
It's interesting. It's one of the things that I've been saying lately to my team is what you focus on, you accomplish more, right? And basically that's what you're saying, which is that if you forget about that, those drift deals, so to speak, that third, and you focus on the other 2/3, if you will, you're going to have better success with those and focus all your energies on those moving forward.
Exactly.
You mentioned follow-up and coaching follow-up and recapping essentially what the previous step was in the follow-up, and that could be sending the agreed upon, the value confirmation, showing a deck, and then sending the deck and so forth. Why is that important? And what I guess I'll ask more specifically, why, if I were to just send a generic, so to speak, follow-up email, follow-up, message after our meeting or after our second meeting or what have you, without necessarily adding in the value confirmation each time along the way, why does that matter? Why is that so important?
Yeah, great question. I think there's two answers. I mean, one, we all live in a world where we're incredibly busy and distracted and overwhelmed with information, right?
Felt like, yeah.
Most of our buyers, they leave the Zoom call and they move on to their next meeting.
Right.
And they probably never think about us again, unless we give them a reason to. And so what happens very often is sellers, they follow up on the meeting. Hey, thanks for your time today. It was really great chatting with you. Here are some of our capabilities. Here's the deck we walked through. What percentage of the time do you think they open the deck?
Less than 10%.
Very infrequently, right? So
right.
I don't go back to the true fit because we already told that story. I mean, it's one of the things we found is if you just put that success statement in the follow-up email, now people could open your email and within 3 sentences, oh, that's why I want to talk to them again. And guess what? When they forward that to their boss and their team, the first thing the boss and team sees is the success statement, the goal you could work on. It's not, hey, click on this deck and read a 40-slide deck. Right?
Right.
Yeah. So it sits with us to recap for our buyers what was valuable in that call. Follow-up email, it's the most powerful sell-through document there is. 2-sentence restatement. And then the reality is, we're not going to, I mean, if you're in selling and you have a 30%, you're batting 300 on a first opportunity, you're doing really well, right? A lot of teams are in the teens. So there's a lot of first calls that you're not going to close in the first time through. So what better way 6 to 9 months later to come back to them with that same email and say, hey, I know we couldn't get to a partnership the first time around. How have you guys done on advancing that goal we talked about? Have you made any progress? I find all the time when I come back to people with an email that recaps the goal, they haven't made progress against that goal. Right. They're now kind of open to a next conversation. And sometimes that conversation is even a better fit because they realize, oh, it's hard to do this ourselves. As opposed to if you just forward hey, we had that call 9 months ago, here was the deck I sent you. There's not a lot of, they want to tell me more about their product. I'm not that interested in that.
So fascinating. Have you tested putting the value confirmation statement in the subject line as opposed to the opener of the email to see if that gets a higher open or a better response
Yeah,
rate?
it's a great question. It's something we may play around with. We haven't not done that. Obviously, in prospecting emails, playing around with the open and subject line is hugely important. Have not done that with the first call follow-up email. But it's a good idea.
You and I know each other offline, so you know I'm an email geek when it comes to these things. You know where that's coming
Yes.
from, I think. One thing that you said that I just want to follow up on as well, the deck, the 46-page deck or something. Is there a I don't even know if say playbook board, but do you have a thought about the length of a deck? I know we're getting sort of in the weeds here, but I'm just curious.
No, we do. I mean, it's part of the deal velocity playbook. We'll come up with a team on, we recommend, no more than 15 to 20 slides. 15, if you can keep it shorter, is better. And it's like, a lot of people do want to open about themselves, just make sure. So great, have a slide or two on, what your mission is and what problems you solve. Come quickly to what you heard in a first call and be able to confirm that. And then this value mapping in a deck scenario, what we say is, think about your product discussion as kind of short bursts, right? Where around each buyer goal area. And so to go to the TrueFit example again, or let's take immersion. If they're interested in leadership or high performance leadership training, or they're interested in diversity and inclusion training, you might have 2 or 3 slides on that. You've recapped that they're interested. Here's how here's the highlights of our capabilities, a couple of slides. Here's a success story from somebody very similar to you, also in financial services, or we're also focused on a high performance group. So you've got 2 or 3 slides that share your capabilities, your success stories, and then you can stop and say, hey, let me get your reactions. Where would you apply our capabilities around high performance leadership or leadership? Where would you apply it first around diversity and inclusion? Would this help move forward on those goals we talked about? So that your product discussion shouldn't be, if you think about that middle part, you've got an hour, you've got 30 minutes, think about it as 3 chunks. I'm going to talk about, one goal area you identified, stop, see if I'm getting alignment. Another, HubSpot, some sellers I've trained from HubSpot calls it tie downs.
What, tie downs?
Tie downs, yeah. Okay. Tie down questions in your demo, right? So it's not just a demo, a pitch. It's like it's supposed to, am I activating my buyer? Are they seeing things that will move them forward? So 15 slides, 15, 20 slides, a few on just resetting on yourself so everybody knows what do they care about the most. Call it 6 to 10 on mapping to their, in phased way to what they value. And then a couple of slides at the end, we think about the value confirmation slides. Could be some people, if it's a later stage call, we encourage to have a, some people call it a work back plan. We call it a mutual success plan. Hey, here's where we are in the process. We're in a stakeholder evaluation period. All the stakeholders of the buying group is on the call. Sounds like we're getting to an area of fit. We might go to a proposal. Here for us are the next steps we need to get to a closed relationship. Does that sound right to you? Who would own those? So you can, in real time, kind of think about the ways forward. It could also be, an ROI slide or an impact slide, right? So let's close out around, are you seeing value and what would we do about it next? But it's a 15 to 20 slide deck is kind of our recommendation.
Very helpful. Okay, fantastic. Glad I asked. The other playbook that you mentioned is deal expansion. How different are the plays in deal expansion as opposed to deal velocity? What other plays are you running in that book?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about deal velocity, it's really about, did I get to a buyer success statement that can motivate a buying group or decision group on their side to close? Closing and expansion to us is about what's the range of buyer goals, what's the range of ways you could help them, and how do you prioritize this? So for us in closing and expansion, a key element of that is this mutual success plan that many teams don't just have an intentional way that they hand off from sales to your account management or customer success. So to go back to the Mark Roberge and HubSpot example around, I'll give you 120% of those things that close in year one after your initial close. Just having a document where you write down, here are the 5 things. We're only closing on this one, but here are the other 4 things, and here's who owns them. They hand off to your account management team or your customer success team so that they can, in their business review calls, come back to it. So a mutual success plan that hands off is one key element. The other is actually committing to, it sounds simple, but a business review call. Is it quarterly? Is it every 4 months? Is it every 6 months? But different from your fulfillment, your training, implementation, onboarding into your platform that is explicitly designed to invite your economic buyer, the people that write the check, the more senior people, back into the conversation, because you're going to come back to how are we doing against the goals we talked about, and are we ready to consider new goal areas?
Right. Okay.
So that's number 2, right? Is having an intentional way, a process, and a, like a first call checklist, you have a 3-part business review call. And then the other part of it is just having a very simple, and there's different ways to design it. I mean, there's nothing new about account plans. I mean, account plans were designed by, I can't remember the name of it, but a marketing and advertising agency in London like 60 years ago, right? People have been using them for decades. We talk about an authentic account plan where you basically now, what are those buyer goal areas I've established? And what are the known personas and what are the unknown personas that I have to get engaged, right, to move a goal area? And then what are my tactics? And the reason a good account plan is, honestly, there are a lot of people that can work on expansion. Sometimes it's sales in white space prospecting campaigns or a BDR team. Sometimes it's account managers. Sometimes it's customer success, just being aware of that. So they're hearing new opportunities and coming back to it. So those, I mean, really the closing and expansion playbook is all around what are the range of buyer goals that I can serve? How do I prioritize them, and how do I make sure in the customer relationship I always come back to the goal areas?
And what about the typical, there's a lot of plays within these playbooks, of course. And you mentioned obviously 5 playbooks. We talked a lot about deal velocity and deal expansion. Are there, and maybe it's not one of these 2 that you just mentioned, but where do people struggle the most with these playbooks? Is there a consistency across the board? Is there a play or set of plays within a playbook that people struggle with? I'm just curious what you've seen with that.
Yeah, I mean, the very number 1 area, honestly, is the thing we talked about first.
Mm-hmm.
It's discovery on what your buyer values the most.
Mm.
And that's not just true for sales, but it's also true for account managers and customer success people. So in the sales context, what everybody now has heard of customer-centric selling or value selling or consultative selling, everybody starts with questions, around, hey, what are you working on? What's keeping you up at night? What they don't get to is, and this can go through the first call or in a second call is, and what would, around that, like, tell me more specifically, what would motivate you? What would get you interested about working with us?
Mm.
What in our solution are you seeing could help advance a goal? So getting to a specific buyer impact or buyer payoff or success that would get them excited about working with you. So why are you working on that? What's the blockers to achieving their goal? Who would get excited? So it's this good discovery should end with a buyer success statement. It might take us a little bit of time to get there, but the more we can, in their words, play back why they're talking to us, the higher we're going to have deal velocity. So that's the thing. But I want to just give one example. I'll give you a follow-up question. The burning glass technologies. I worked with their customer success team, and they're totally typical. Often customer success people feel like when I'm talking about buyer goals, I'm trying to sell them something. And they sort of, they don't want to feel like they're selling. They want to do customer implementation, care, and success. Totally get it. One member of their team, Jeremy, who basically said, I see this as an opportunity for customer care. And he would start his implementation calls with, remember, here are the 4 or 5 areas our platform solves. Today, we're focused on number 1, undergraduate enrollment. But remember, there's 4 other things that it could do. And as we go through the call, I just want you to be thinking about, are there other parts of your team that I should be talking to? And then at the end, he would come back to that. And invariably, 40, 50% of the time, he'd get an internal referral. Just by starting and ending with the other problems they could solve. And the whole middle of the call was, how are we doing on helping you to implement around that 4 goal area? So very typical customer success call, but he began and ended with the range of buyer goals it helps solve. So I think we're still in a transition from a product-centric world to a buyer value-driven world, an authentic world, right? We're always re-anchoring on what our buyers care about the most, what's in it for them. And if we remember that, right, it just always go back to what your buyer cares about, what's in it for them. It just helps everything.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I've gotten, and there's a lot, but if I were to send you a follow-up email after this, let's just say, which I will, of course, it's buyer success statement, right? To me, it's like, that's huge, and to keep coming back to that, and you get that buyer success statement in the value confirmation part of your initial discovery call, or frankly, I guess during all along the sales process as you come to the end of calls, and then keep following up with that throughout the process, which I think is huge. And then something you mentioned just now about, in that last example, I think it was Burning Glass, right? The gentleman from Burning Glass, you had said something earlier about authentic account plan and the known and unknown personas, which is exactly what he did, right? Talking to a known persona and asking them about an unknown persona that could help them expand, for sure. Oh man, I have so many more questions to ask. We're coming up to the end here. Let me just ask this one question, then we'll get into the final 5, which is, how do you, and I guess specifically when you talk about the area where most people struggle, how do you help teams, if you're working with a vice president of sales or director of sales or whomever, how do you help teams execute on all of these things, right? Because it's one thing to have a playbook, it's another thing to actually execute the playbook properly.
Yeah, I mean, we think there are 3 pillars to growth acceleration. It's the playbooks, it's the individual practice of those playbooks, right? And getting some coaching around where you're strong and where there are opportunities for improvement. And then the intangible that's hard to manage, it's the team-based learning. So one of the powers of playbooks is, now I have a common language to talk with my peers to learn quicker. Because every team member has strengths and they have gaps. And if you're open to learning from your peers and your customers, you will improve your performance.
Oh man, that's such an eye-opening thing. The playbook is not just for, it's not sort of a unilateral thing where it's like, okay, we understand how to talk to the customers, but it's also important from a collaborative perspective, where you can learn from your teammates and you can collaborate and get feedback and all that stuff. And it decentralizes learning as well, because it doesn't necessarily fall on leadership as well, organically, as the playbook evolves and as people are discussing it. And if you have, frankly, to give them another plug, like in a Lego, something like that, where people can communicate all of this, it makes everybody better.
That's exactly right. So we always, I mean, if it's a value discovery questions, or it's your value questions at the end, your buying roadmap questions, or your talk tracks around, back to TrueFit, your talk tracks, your success stories for how you can help with returns.
Mhm.
You build those, a common playbook, but then everybody's got to put it in their own voice, their own language within that framework, and
Mhm.
then come back with, hey, when I tried this success story in this way, boom, it really landed. Maybe you should try it. So it's that team to team, more fluid. Everybody does their own, but then you come back to updating the playbooks, sharing best practices. That is, one of your questions about what gets me excited. It's that team flow. When the team is just, you can see it, people are clicking and coming back with what helped them close the deal or expand a deal or build the velocity out of that first call, the aha question, the success story that really landed. I mean, that's just, it's awesome. It's like it sit in the middle of an orchestra, that's just jamming.
Beautiful symphony. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, you ready to get to the aforementioned, the final 5?
I am.
All right, and for those of you who are regular listeners, and hopefully there's a lot, I used to call this a rapid fire 5, but then in listening to the answers to these questions and my propensity to ask some follow-up questions to these answers, they're no longer the rapid fire 5 anymore. They're just the final 5, but I'll try to resist too many follow-ups here. All right, here we go. Do you have a philosophy or general approach to how you prioritize your time?
Yeah, I'll start with an example. We 7 or 8 years ago now lived in Essex, and my wife in our church bulletin we go to Park Street Church. She saw an advertisement for a 5th grade teaching role, which she applied to. It's in Boston. She was drawn to that. She took the job, and so my wife and then my wife and son commuted down for a couple of years before we moved into Boston from Essex.
Okay.
So we were up at 5:30 every morning. And what I found was I had 2 or 3 hours every morning before other people were clicking in to lift the boulder for the day, right? There's this framework for time management: boulder, rocks, and sand.
Yes.
And so what I have found is, for me, key to time management is starting the day with that heavy lift. And then the second key is just kind of making time through the day for revenue and people. Because I got to drive, and early stage growth companies, you got to drive revenue and you got to tend to your people.
It's funny. I was just reciting the rocks part of that to myself this morning. As I was preparing for this, I was saying, you know what, this is a pretty good day. I took care of the big rocks this morning. I have one boulder that I've taken care of today at 2:00, which is this interview. So absolutely appreciate that. Tell me about a setback and how you overcame it.
Man, we got whacked. I don't know about you, but we got whacked at the beginning of the pandemic. March to April last year, literally lost 40% of our revenue. And almost all of it was, so month to month revenue. We have a, kind of monthly services billing model. And almost all of it was kind of on that smaller side of folks that were maybe still working on product market fit or just under $1 million revenue or so. Not growth companies, but emerging growth companies. And so, we got a PPP loan, which helped, but man, it was just a scramble to kind of go out and get the deals to get the team covered in a reasonable period of time. And a lot of it came down to what we talked about earlier: focus. And we basically cut back a lot of other stuff we were doing and figured out these are the areas that we win. That we can proactively network to these kind of, forming go-to-market teams, call it 2 to 5 million, and then those growth go-to-market teams, 5 to 15 million. So let's work our networks. Let's work the, VC relationships. And so we ended the year much stronger than we had started it, but it was, it's a little scary. There was blood running in the street there for a little bit. You remember?
Yes, you certainly were not alone. That's for sure.
No.
Speaking of that, how do you manage stress or prevent it from overcoming you?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned going to Park Street Church. Faith is a pretty important part of our life. For me, prayer and meditation, honestly. So I start every day with prayer, and I try and meditate at the end of the day 5 times. And if people that don't come from kind of a faith background, I would encourage you to take up meditation. It will change your life. Yes, I started doing it 3 or 4 years ago, and now it's like the one thing that if I don't do, I know in 2 days, I know I'm on edge.
I feel the same way about meditation for sure. I started meditating, I don't know, a couple of years ago, maybe at least 2 or 3 years ago for sure. And I'll have my sprints where I'm doing it every day. And then I'll have my periods of time where I'm not. And it shows, it shows up for sure. So very cool. What do you want to get better at right now?
Yeah, two things I'm working on, leading rather than doing.
Mm.
So I've set certain, early growth company, it's the founder, jumping in phenomenon. So I've kind of set, and we've talked about this offline, goals for what are the roles that I'm going to just offload.
Mm-hmm.
Bright red line, I don't do that anymore. And so I can be in the market and helping to scale. So leading is one, and public speaking is the other. I'm going to go to a course in October around our book, just for public speaking. I do a lot of this kind of stuff. I do a lot of facilitation for up to groups of 30 or 40 where there's still interactivity, and that is an area I love and a strength. But standing up in front of a group of a couple of hundreds, never been a great strength for me. So I'd like to get better at that.
Yeah, well, I can tell this medium is certainly a strength for you. That's for sure. And I know my audience will too. Couple more questions. What are you most excited about right now, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, professionally, well, I'll start with personally. Usually personal revolves around the family. I've done karate with my kids for about 7 years. And this is fun for me. I don't know if they think it's as fun, but hopefully in a few years they will. So our dojo is up in Beverly. We only get up there once a month to train with our head trainer. So I'm basically their trainer at this point. And we sync up with our head curriculum. So I'm working with my daughter on her 2nd degree junior black belt, which she'll have on October 30th, her test. And then my son, he and I are both going to test he's going to test for his adult black belt next summer. So he and I, that's a journey. You got to commit to it for, 6, 7, 8 months. So he and I are working out together. We're going to test together. And so that's just been awesome. I like to do what my kids like to do on the weekend. So it's not all about what dad or mom wants them to do, but I'm enjoying just kind of bringing them along. And this is something that means a lot to me.
That is fantastic. Remind me to invite you all to dinner if I need to be in some strange area or dark alley, absolutely, so I can have some protection for me and my family who aren't black belts, actually, who are no belts, frankly. So that's really, really cool. What about professionally?
Yeah, professionally, I would just say, I have been doing this for a while, right? This kind of the book, as you know, is called the Revenue Acceleration Playbook. It's coming out next April from Page 2, and already, Amazon pre-orders. You can go and Google that. I've been doing this for a while. The book is kind of writing down what I did as a revenue leader and then a consultant. What's great for me is now actually seeing other people, both internal consultants, but also we have affiliates who are kind of contractors. They have their own business. A lot of the sales methodologies were built this way. Just seeing them able to run the approach, run the playbooks, that it is actually repeatable, that has been awesome.
That is fantastic. And I was actually going to ask you how folks can find your book and buy it. And so go to repeat it again. Where should they go? And if
I would, for right now, we're going to update the book landing site. This is my first of a long podcast tour. I have a partner that's going to put us on a bunch of podcasts. So we got to make it that easier. But right now I would go to Google and I would just say Revenue Acceleration Playbook. Okay. And it will come, you'll see, we come up as a second link right now. You can pre-order the book there, or you can go to the Winalytics website if you want to get more background on the book, just Winalytics, WINALYTICS.com. And we have our book, or the book link, and they can just click on that, learn a little bit more about the book, see the plays, see the stories, etc.
And if people want to follow up with you, just say thank you, perhaps maybe ask a follow-up question that I neglected to ask. How should folks reach out to you?
Yeah, they can, I mean, you can send me an email at bkeltner, BKELTNER @winalytics.com, or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just search for Brent Keltner, send me a message there. And always happy to, have follow-up conversations over email or, by phone or Zoom or whatever works best.
Fantastic. Brent Keltner, author of Revenue Acceleration Playbook, founder and president of Winalytics. Thank you for going over quota.
Thank you, Jay. Great to see you today.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. I'm cueing the music.